Gloria Allred is the most famous woman attorney practicing law in the nation today. She is a tireless and successful advocate for victims whose rights have been violated. Her high-profile legal battles have led to many landmark precedent-setting court decisions and hundreds of millions of dollars for her clients. When a high-profile legal case hits the airwaves, we have become accustomed to seeing Gloria Allred in some key role as attorney or commentator. But this nationally recognized advocate has built her pioneering career on much more than O.J. Simpson and Amber Frey. As a tireless crusader against discrimination in all areas of our lives. As a tireless crusader against discrimination in all areas of our lives, Allred's legal reach has been wide and long. For the past 4 decades, she has played an integral role in combating injustices and winning new rights, especially for children and minorities. Naming all of her awards, honors, and accolades would literally take up our whole interview time. But I think it's important to say that in 2015, Gloria was given the LG Award for her decades-long commitment to secure equality for the LGBT community, and in September of this year, Gloria was inducted into the Women's Hall of Fame along with Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, activist Angela Davis, and actor-activist Jane Fonda. Also, about that documentary, Seeing Allred, my dear friend Robbie Tolan was one of the producers, and I want to take a second to thank her for connecting me with Gloria and making this interview possible. Thank you, Robbie. So, Gloria, before we start your interview, curious if you eat breakfast.
Always.
You do?
Of course.
Okay, did you have breakfast today?
Always.
What did you have today?
Today I had some kashi cereal with almond milk.
Yum. Yum.
That's it.
And so that...
Usually I have some fruit, but I was out of fruit this morning and I didn't have time to go get it.
All right. Well, that's a good endorsement for kashi cereal right there. Be buying some of that. Power breakfast for a powerful woman. All right. So I'm going to ask you to finish the sentence for me. I was the only one in the room who?
Well, for 43 years, we have been a feminist law firm and the leading women's rights law firm in the United States. So I think I'm the only one in the room that has that record of success as a women's rights, minority rights law firm for 43 years with the same partners for 43 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. And before we go any further, I just have to tell you again what an honor it is to sit in front of you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate being invited.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to be on your podcast.
Oh,
So cool.
Makes me so happy.
So,
Scott calls you a superhero, and all superheroes have an origin story. And from what that story tells you, like how they gain their powers and why they're fighting crime. From what I can gather, your origin story began in Acapulco when you were in your 20s. Is that correct?
well, I think my origin story is really an evolution
Okay.
as opposed to one moment in time, because I think all of us have life experiences as women that it becomes like a snowball effect, and all of a sudden there's a point at which we realize, wait, it wasn't just my bad luck. It isn't something to do with me. There is something happening in the world where this can happen to women. Whether it's gender violence, whether it's pay inequity, whether it is discrimination in education, whatever it is, a combination of the above.
Yeah.
Inability of the system to assist in obtaining child support, so single moms are forced into lives of poverty. Whatever it is, it's an accumulation. And I think the aha moment came for me when I finally was an attorney and I began to see so many women coming to me with similar stories. They didn't know each other. So I saw a pattern of discrimination. I saw the system failing, and I realized that we needed to win change, and we had to fight for that change because nobody was going to give it to us.
Yeah. Well, you fight for the rights of a lot of people who have been the victims of sexual violence. And the story in Acapulco, the one I was referring to, you were a victim of sexual violence there.
I was a victim of gender violence, sexual violence,
Mm-hmm.
which is sexual assault or rape at gunpoint. And, of course, it was totally unexpected. It was shocking, especially because it was a medical doctor, not someone I would ever think would do that if I went out on a date with him,
Right.
not someone I thought would have a gun. And, yes, that definitely was life-changing. And also it helped me to understand years later other women who thought no one's going to believe me if I go to the police or I tell someone. So there's no point in going to the police in Mexico because this is a person in power. This is an authority figure, and who am I? I'm in my 20s. Nobody's ever heard of me. I'm an American. Why would anyone believe me against what was sure to be the denial of a Mexican doctor? So I completely get it when women say, I didn't think I'd be believed, and that's why I didn't tell anyone.
Of course. I was really struck by that. I'm so glad you talked about that because I was going to ask you about that. Because knowing who you are and what you've done and what you've accomplished, it's hard to believe that you didn't think that you would be believed then.
Well, when I was in my 20s, I didn't have the knowledge that I do now.
Right.
And so I was like a lot of young women. I didn't know anybody except, people in my family and, a few people, friends that I had, co-workers. But no, I can understand
Right.
why women would think they're not believed.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this was pre-Roe v. Wade.
This was pre-Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade is the 1973 United States Supreme Court decision
Yes.
in which the United States Supreme Court decided, in a case called Roe v. Wade, that states could not criminalize abortion as they were doing, that would be unconstitutional
Mm-hmm.
because a woman has a constitutional right to choose abortion.
Yes.
It's a fundamental right, and that right cannot be restricted in the first 3 months of her pregnancy, and in the second 3 months it may be able to be regulated, maybe in the last 3 months, depending if the fetus is viable or not. It may or may not be prohibited, but the point is that was really important because pre-Roe v. Wade, states were criminalizing abortion. What they were doing mainly was they were, beside putting roadblocks in the way of women who wanted to have an abortion legally, they would also make it a crime for a doctor to perform an abortion, that is a licensed healthcare provider. So what that meant was that women who wanted abortions would need to get an abortion from an unlicensed healthcare provider. In other words, somebody was just doing it for the money.
Right.
So that, or, of course, wealthy women, which I was not, could go to another country or maybe to another state where it was legal. But poor women, young women, rural women could not afford to do that. And so often they had to go to an unlicensed healthcare provider like I did
Right.
and risk their lives. And some of them died, some of them were maimed from illegal abortions.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm so committed to making sure that abortion is safe, legal, affordable, and available. Unfortunately, today we are back again in witnessing many states attempting to challenge Roe v. Wade, that is, passing restrictions, putting burdens on healthcare clinics in order to stop women from getting abortions, but it's just putting women's lives and health at risk.
Right. And you also know this firsthand because your life was put in danger.
I do. Well, I had an abortion by an unlicensed healthcare person. Well, actually, he wasn't a healthcare person at all. He was just a stranger.
Really?
And but he certainly wasn't licensed.
Right.
And so he left me to hemorrhage in a bathtub. And so I almost died. I was taken to the hospital when I had 106-degree fever and packed in ice. So fortunately for me, I lived, but I did learn from that. It's a teaching moment. And the teaching moment was that I believe that abortion should be safe and affordable and legal and available. And this is a time now where literally we're talking about a life or death decision, because some of these cases from some of these states are going to work themselves up, potentially the Supreme Court, if
Right.
the Supreme Court of the United States accepts those cases, which they may do. And if they don't, well, some of the restrictions may still be in place now. In reality, women have a hard time in some states finding any abortion clinic at all. Even though it's still legal,
Right.
there may be only one clinic in the state. And some women don't even have the bus fare to get to that clinic because it's hundreds of miles away from them. And so this is what the anti-choice forces are doing, what I call them the mandatory motherhood forces that think that a fertilized egg should have more rights than an adult woman.
Wow.
This is what they're doing. They think they're going to prevent abortions. They're not going to prevent them. They're just going to mean that women's lives are at risk because they're going to find someone to do the abortion if they can, and then they may hemorrhage or die from the infection by people who don't know how to do it safely. Or they'll be forced to take a pregnancy to term.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens to a lot of young women,
Yes.
not in a position to really take care of those children.
Well, and I thought I was also struck by the words of the nurse that spoke to you afterward. And I think she said, "I hope you've learned your lesson."
Yes.
Which
Yes,
is
and
just unfathomable.
Exactly. Well, it's not unfathomable to think that, of course, there are nurses that, have certain beliefs
Right.
against the right to choose abortion. But to say that to a young woman who literally has gone to the hospital, and the only time they took us in the hospital in those days
Mm-hmm.
was if we were bleeding to death.
Right.
Not to have the abortion, but only kind of afterwards, then you could go. I never forgot those words
No.
because it was just, something that we, it was just so inappropriate at that time.
Yeah. I was going to say the irony of that was that I felt like her words inspired something else in you. Not that you learned the lesson that she thought you should learn, but that you learned a different kind of lesson and that you didn't want this to happen to other women.
Well, this is my perspective. My perspective is when bad things happen, I think there's a book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, but when bad things happen, you can learn something from it.
Mm-hmm.
There are teaching moments in all of that. Sometimes you don't know exactly the purpose then, and of course all of us would prefer if bad things didn't happen, even if we learned something from it.
Yeah.
But it's going to happen to everyone. Everyone has a number of challenges in their lives, different challenges. None of us are spared. I don't care who we are. I don't care what gender, race, religion, physical condition, sexual orientation, gender. We all have challenges. And so the question is, how do we cope with those challenges, and what do we learn from those challenges that can help us later, that can help others, family members, co-workers, members of our community,
Right.
and to make this a better world. So sometimes we don't know until later what that purpose was,
Right.
whether or not that was, there was a purpose in that. But I think we can all learn from that and help to make this a better world when we realize what it is we can learn from that.
Yeah. Well, you certainly do that. And That kind of brings me to my next question, which is, you've probably done the most for women's rights than anybody I know about, from what I've seen and what I've seen on television, what I've read about you.
Well, I give credit to my clients, of course, because I couldn't have done it without them.
Yes, but you see injustice. This is what I see from my perspective. You see injustice, whether it's winnable or not, whether it's changeable or not, you go up against it.
Well, sometimes, if we can, and we have to assess the facts in each case. But, if we feel that it shouldn't happen, okay, that, for example, the case we had early, I think it was 1983, the two women that we represented, is for a famous case, Rowland versus Kowalski, involved Papa Shoe Restaurant in Los Angeles, where our two clients, an African-American woman and a Latina woman,
Yes.
went into Papa Shoe Restaurant to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And they had made a reservation, and they were life partners. And they went and they had reserved the private booth in the romantic section of the restaurant. You walked up a few steps, and there was about, I think, a semicircle of booths with sheer curtains, and you could sit there and the violinist would stroll by playing.
Right.
And it was, very nice area of the restaurant for romantic dining. And so they were seated there, and then they alleged that someone came up from the restaurant, I don't know, it's a maitre d' or someone else, and told them there's been a mistake. They can't sit in that booth. It's only for couples. And of course they thought, well, what are we? We're a couple. Right. It's only for essentially opposite sex couples. Mm. And they would have to move. They could sit anywhere else in the restaurant, but not in the section for romantic dining. And they said, well, why? They said, well, there's a house policy. Two people sitting of the same sex can't sit in these booths. So they said, well, we want to see, I think, the owner or somebody higher up in the restaurant. And so that person came, and the person who came said, well, actually, they said there really is a city ordinance, a city law that prohibits two people of the same gender sit in this romantic section of the restaurant. And they said, well, we're businesswomen, we're not lawyers, but we just can't believe there's a law, a city ordinance that says two people of the same sex can't sit in the romantic section. And so then they said publicly later, we thought about, well, what would Martin Luther King Jr. want us to do? Sit in the back of the bus, so to speak, in the main section of the restaurant, or go to Gloria Allred? And they said he would want us to go to Gloria Allred. So they did come to me, and we had to decide, well, wait a minute, is this a ridiculous case? Because after all, they could still get a meal.
Right.
Or is this an important civil rights case? And so then we decided, if we thought that Rosa Parks having to sit in the back of the bus was an important case, even though she would still get a bus ride, then this was an important case, because this is really about not the dinner, it's about respect and dignity and treating individuals who are part of a minority, in this case, two women who happen to be lesbian, with respect and dignity and equality.
Right.
And so we did file the case. The judge decided he wanted to go see the booth, which of course factually didn't matter because everybody agreed on the facts. It was really a question of law, but we went. And anyway, he ruled against us. We went up to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal reversed, and we won.
The judge ruled against you?
Yeah, the lower court,
Yeah.
which often happens, because then new law essentially is made by the Court of Appeals, not by lower court judges. And there had been no case like this before.
Right.
But we went up to the Court of Appeals, and they reversed the lower court judge, and we won a legal precedent, which we were able to cite in cases after that. And the precedent was that businesses were not allowed under our state Civil Rights Act to discriminate on account of sexual orientation or gender.
Yeah.
And so that was very important, and we've had a long string of cases involving discrimination against individuals who were gay or lesbian, who had AIDS or perceived to have AIDS, and on and on. So, ever since that time. So the point of all that is that we perceived it just wasn't right.
Right.
It wasn't what the law should be, if in fact that's what it was. But we thought there was a chance that we could change it, and we decided to take the case, and we're so glad that we did.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's interesting because one of the lawyers on the other side at one point came up to me in the hallway and said, "Gloria, we didn't know they were lesbians.
No.
They were dressed so nicely."
Oh. Oh boy.
Yeah, or oh girl.
Oh girl.
But anyway, so yeah, those were the days. And
Yeah.
so we have a long string of cases that we did because we thought it was wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I think I remember that the restaurant owner was so angry about having to open those booths that he closed them all.
At
right?
some point,
Yeah.
the restaurant went out of business, which
Yeah.
we didn't really care about because that's not our issue. They could stay in business, they just can't discriminate. But if they want to go out of business, that's up to them.
Yeah.
This is the same restaurant that there was actually a report in a magazine, even before our case, that had monkeys in the restaurant fornicating.
Right.
So
yes.
that was so weird. And yet, two women who
Yes.
weren't even kissing, they were just sitting there
Right.
wanting to have dinner to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. That somehow was not acceptable.
But it's a matter of equality, right? It's like
But
when
it's equality under the law.
yes.
That's what we're about. We're about the
Right.
justice piece. We're not just about providing a voice for minorities and women, although that was important.
Mhm.
And we had our clients speak out because they wanted to and because we thought that would be a teaching moment also for the public, because mostly gays and lesbians were in the closet at that time. And so there were all kinds of stereotypes about, well, what is a person?
Yes.
What does she look like? What does she sound like if
Right.
she's a lesbian?
Yeah.
And so they were very articulate and they spoke out, and I thought that was extremely important because change is when people can see who the people are who are victims
Mhm.
and understand what the problem is and hear from the victim and understand why there needs to be a change and how the victims are working to win that change. And so I give them a lot of credit for having spoken out, especially at that time.
Sure.
Things have changed so much in the last, I don't know how many years, 20, 40, more than 40, 45 years, but only because individuals fought to win that change.
Right.
I always say nobody ever gave women any rights at all. No one gives any rights to women and minorities today. We always have to fight to win them.
Yep. Well, and I'm thinking about the case where I forgot the woman's name, but she was a member of a country club and wasn't allowed to golf.
I've had many cases like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
And then but the times or dates where she could play, and she was an equal dues paying member, were not equal.
Yeah, mostly the preferable tee times,
Right.
tee off times
Yes.
were given to the men,
Mhm.
and then the women got the less desirable tee times.
Right.
And or in some cases they weren't permitted into private clubs at all.
Yes.
So we fought that battle. I became the first woman member of the Friars Club
Yes, that's what I was going to ask you about
in
next.
Beverly Hills.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, and Milton Berle inducted me.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, and so that's the whole story in and of itself. And then I went to New York because male California friars had reciprocal privileges to go to the Friars Club, Celebrity Club in New York. But then they wouldn't let me make a reservation for lunch there because they said no women are allowed at lunch. You can't even bring our secretaries or wives.
Wow.
They didn't say or our mistresses, but I
Right.
gather that's
It's
probably
implied.
was part of their problem too.
Yeah.
But anyway, I said, well, don't think of me as a woman, just think of me as a California friar.
Right.
And they wouldn't let me make a reservation for lunch. So I filed the first complaint of discrimination against a private club in New York with the New York City Commission on Human Rights. They found that there was probable cause to believe I was discriminated against on account of my gender. And then the U.S. Supreme Court took up the issue of whether private clubs in New York were permitted to discriminate or not. And they found that the Supreme Court decided no, the ordinance, that is the city law in New York, which prohibited gender discrimination by private clubs, could be upheld, was constitutional.
Mm-hmm.
So when that happened on a Monday, I immediately called the New York club. I was in Los Angeles in my office, and I said, did you hear about the U.S. Supreme Court decision today upholding the city law that prohibits private club discrimination? They said, yes. I said, so may I have lunch there tomorrow? And they said, no. I said, is it still because I'm a woman? Yes.
Wow.
I said, well, I'm going to be taking a red eye tonight. When I get off the plane in New York tomorrow, I will be coming there for lunch. So please have my table ready. So then I flew all night. I got off the plane, called a news conference. I went to the club. Henny Youngman, who was like the most famous person in burlesque in his day, came out, and he tried to prevent me from going in.
Like forcibly, or just talking you out of it?
Well, he was making a lot of burlesque jokes.
Mm-hmm.
You're wearing a red suit, you look like a blood clot type of thing.
Oh.
But more importantly than that, there were like men looking out the window and yelling, names for women's genital areas in a pejorative way. And of course that never deters me.
Right.
And I always say, if they're calling me names, I've won, because that shows they don't have any good argument, because if they had a good argument, they would give it.
Yes.
But since they can't think of one,
Yeah.
then they just do name calling. So I know then I've won.
Mm-hmm.
So then I let Mr. Henny Youngman tell his jokes, because Friars Club people tell jokes a lot. There are a lot of entertainers there. And I let him have his moment in front of the cameras. And then when he finished, I just touched him gently and I said, Mr. Youngman, you're not stopping progress for women. I am going into the club.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
going to have lunch
Yeah.
there. So I just brushed him aside, which was shocking to him because of his celebrity status. He was used to everybody's, just bowing and scraping essentially.
Of course.
And, agreeing with him. But I'm not there to be anybody's, enable people in their discriminatory tactics.
No.
So I just went in, and then I said to the maitre d', as I promised, I'm here for my lunch. Is my table ready? And he said, yes, Ms. Allred, right this
Wow.
way. And with that, I became the first woman member ever to have lunch at the Friars Club. And I required them, in settlement of my claim of discrimination, to open up the club to women in each and every aspect of the club, which is what they did. Fast forward, 30 years later, 40 years later, I can't remember what year that was, but something like that. Last year, it was the, I think maybe 30th or 40th anniversary of my requiring the Friars roast. And we had all women entertainers, comics, and so forth on the dais
Really?
to roast me.
Yeah.
And so, which had never also ever happened at the Friars Club
No.
before. And so, and then I had, when my book came out in 2006, I had the first book signing there. And the dean of the Friars Club thanked me and said, we're sorry, we apologize. You were right, we were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We are a better and a stronger club and a more interesting club because you made us take women. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Really amazing.
But, what's the point of all this? The point is a lot of private clubs excluded women, barred women, which meant that women didn't have the networking opportunities for business that men did.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we had to break open those barriers.
Yeah. In Seeing Allred, there's this scene...
Which is on Netflix.
Which is on Netflix.
Still streaming.
It's amazing. You have to watch it. But there's this scene that really just made me so nervous, where you're on the steps of... Is it the Lincoln Memorial?
Spoiler alert.
Sorry. It doesn't ruin the whole thing. But
Yeah, we
he's-
won't tell them what happens, but it was
well, I'm just
completely unscripted
Right.
and surprising and spontaneous.
but
and I was
he's-
confronted.
He's threatening. And you
Yeah.
don't seem to bat an eyelash. And I wondered about the danger of what you do and how you handle that. Was that typical? Are you usually that calm when faced with danger?
I am.
You are. You're used to it?
Well, before I became a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
44 years ago, I was a public school teacher in some very tough schools. And where almost all the kids, I was an all-boys school in Philadelphia, high school, and pretty much all the boys were taller than I was. I was one of the first female teachers.
Yeah.
And in fact, they used to, sometimes the administration would send me in to break up the fights because I could do that. Just because, I understand that people are human beings and they, and these are kids. And although the ones confronting me in the film were not. And I just think if you treat everybody with respect and dignity, that they will respond.
Mm.
And usually people are taken back when you treat them with respect because they're so not expecting that.
Right.
And so that's really what was in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I've always done.
Yeah.
And somehow it's worked.
Yeah.
And, I can't say it will always work for every situation, every time. But I think, it certainly has helped me in the past.
So are you brave or fearless?
Well, I guess it's fearless if you like the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not if you don't.
Right.
But I don't know. There's no change that happens without courage. And that's for anyone, anytime,
Yeah.
and without sacrifice and without discipline,
Mm-hmm.
without focus on the goal.
Yeah.
So it is necessary. I mean, what we have right now and always have is the status quo, which means the way things are.
Right.
So in order to change the way things are, and for women and minorities, the way things are needs to be changed.
Yeah.
Status quo is not acceptable.
Right.
It has downside economic consequences, physical, emotional, sociological consequences that are negative. So you do need courage in order to help to win change.
Mm-hmm.
And, when my grandchildren were little, and they're adults now, and they were sometimes fearful for some of the things I was doing.
Yeah.
When, for example, when I was going to Italy to try to get someone who I believed had murdered the mother of his child, to try to get him brought to justice. They were worried for me, and I said, here's what I believe. Better a short life with courage than a long life in fear.
Mm.
And that's what I believe.
Wow.
But I would like to live as long as possible because
Yes.
I have so much work to do.
Yes. I've heard you
But
say that before.
I
love
can't do that and be effective if I'm going to be paralyzed by fear.
That. Right. Right.
And it's not acceptable to me. It's not even a possibility
Mm-hmm.
because the cost of living in fear is much greater than the cost of breaking out of that fear and becoming empowered. And I know that you're dedicating your program to the empowerment of women and minorities.
Yes.
And that's the only way we win change is when we are all empowered. So empowerment does have a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. It's
Mhm.
contagious.
Yes.
We see that in the women's marches every year.
Yes, we do.
People who go, and to anyone who's never gone, I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
It's just can't even describe the experience. And I've been to all of them.
I would say I
I
love
will be
seeing
there
all of
again in
them.
January. I
Yes.
will wherever. I'm not sure in which city I'll be. Last year I was in L.A. Before that I was in Park City, Utah, when our film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. But we
Right.
had what they called it the Respect Rally
Mm-hmm.
there. The year before I was in Washington. So I do think everybody should go and take your friend, your women friends, your male friends,
Yep.
your toddlers, whomever, your family, because it can be life-changing for a lot of people.
Sure.
And it's wonderful to see that many people coming out in support of change.
And to feel it.
You can feel it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think the signs are the best part.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They're great.
I love the sign of an older woman. I mean, there's so many really good ones that she was carrying a sign that said something about, it said equal rights for women. She said something about, I've been carrying the same damn sign for 50 years and my arms are getting tired.
Yes, I saw that.
Isn't that a good one?
It was great. So I'm just going to move along a little bit. The Daily, which is a podcast that came out, is two New York Times reporters, Joey Cantor and Megan Twohey. They had two kind of, they billed it as kind of an expose. One episode was on your daughter, but the episode on you, it just really, it didn't seem that there was any, I was very underwhelmed by the quote unquote evidence they had against you. I knew, I didn't know, but I thought that it would probably be nothing. And I was listening to make sure that it was nothing. And that was my experience. Can you tell me what you thought about that whole thing? And
okay, well, yeah. I have not heard that podcast.
Oh, you haven't?
But I heard about the podcast.
Okay.
And I think the essence was that they alleged that I had entered, that I had assisted a client in entering into a confidential settlement.
Yes.
In reference to Mr. Weinstein.
Yes.
I will say this, I never affirm or deny whether I have even represented anyone that's confidential, unless they say that I have. That's up to the client if they want to say that. But if I have ever entered into confidential settlements, and by the way, I have done thousands of them, I'm not going to say for whom.
Right.
Because of my own sense of integrity, if I sign something or if I don't, or if another member of my firm does, I will never violate it,
right.
Even if a client does, because my word is my word.
Yes.
In any event, but I want to talk a little bit about confidential settlements and why I believe that it's important to preserve the ability of victims to enter into confidential settlements. Point is, many people do not realize that if a victim is raped or sexually assaulted or sexually harassed, that besides that being a crime, it is also possible to have legal rights against the perpetrator of that rape, sexual assault, or sexual harassment. And that even without a lawsuit, it is possible to hold that sexual predator accountable.
Right.
And the way you can hold them accountable is if they have to pay the cost of the wrong. I don't believe that the victim should have to pay the cost of the wrong. I think the wrongdoer should have to pay the cost of the wrong.
Right.
When a woman, for example, is raped, she has no choice about the fact that she's being sexually assaulted. Someone made that choice for her to sexually assault, and the choice is taken away from her. I believe that women should have as many legal choices as possible after that happens to hold the predator accountable. One way is by reporting to the police and seeing if he'll be prosecuted. It's not legally required. It's an option.
Right.
And often DAs don't feel that there's sufficient evidence to hold a perpetrator, to prove that a perpetrator, beyond a reasonable doubt, did that crime.
Right.
So they don't prosecute even if a victim wishes them to. But another way is through a civil lawsuit against the perpetrator. And another way is even without a lawsuit, that a victim may have a choice to settle the case, make him pay without filing a lawsuit. In other words, enter into a confidential settlement.
Right.
Even though we live in the age of the internet, where it seems like almost everybody wants to tell everything about their life.
The moment it happens.
Yeah, or, or not long thereafter.
Right.
The facts are that there are some people who would like their privacy,
Sure.
who don't want what happened to them on the internet. who don't want their mother, their father, their sister, their brother, their aunt, their grandma to know that they were raped, sexually assaulted, or sexually harassed. They don't want their future employers to know that. They don't want members of their community to know that, but they do want accountability from the predator. So that's a choice that often we will provide to them, that maybe we can get them a confidential settlement.
Right. And they don't
To
have to
maybe,
go
it might be, hundreds of thousands of dollars, it might be millions of dollars, it might be something less, depending on what the facts are. And often the defendants will say, well, we want it to be confidential. And the settlement will involve their deciding they're not going to sue if they can get that.
Right.
They can go on, they can get funds for their medical bills, their therapy bills, their pain and suffering, their lost wages, whatever it is, and maybe in excess of that.
Yeah.
So there are many of our clients that say, yes, please, I would like to have that. If you can get that for me, that would be great. And then there are other clients that are happy to go through years and years of litigation, answer questions, interrogatories, testify under oath in depositions, go to trial, take the risk the jury will or will not believe them.
Right.
And that's, but most people would like to try to see if they can settle it first.
Yeah.
So the idea that journalists would somehow think that choice should be taken away, that it's wrong for victims to have a choice to have a confidential settlement, which, by the way, is completely voluntary.
Right.
Nobody makes them do that.
Yeah.
Nobody says you must sign a voluntary settlement. Nobody silences them. That's their choice.
Yes.
That they would like the money and they will agree, because some of them didn't want anyone to know in the first place, to keep it confidential.
Yeah.
But I understand there are reporters, they would like to know everything. They're reporters, okay? That's what they do for a living. A turtle is a turtle, a tiger is a tiger. Don't expect a turtle to be a tiger or a tiger to be a turtle.
Right.
This is not the way it works. But my job is not to take that choice away from them, although the press and politicians would often like that choice to be taken away so that victims have to file a public lawsuit and litigate it publicly. I'm not in favor of taking that choice away from victims, because they've had that choice taken away when they were raped.
Right.
And so, and I can't, and I don't force anyone to sign a confidential settlement. It's a whole voluntary process. It's up to them.
Yes.
And so I do know that it does appear that certain press have, kind of elevated to sainthood reporters who have said, oh, just is a terrible thing that anybody should be able to have a confidential settlement. But when you think about it, as I explained it, first of all, this is not new, okay? No. It's not like, oh, news flash, victims can get confidential settlements. Like, right. And I just don't think it's right to try to persuade people to violate their settlements, their confidential settlements, because these settlements often mean that if they are violated, that often the victim is going to have to, a lawsuit may be filed by the predator against them to try to get their money back. So, victims can violate, they take the risk, they will then have to go to arbitration or some other process and have to give the money back. And some people feel like, well, I did get the money, but I want to tell everything anyway, which is not what they agreed to in the first place, which nobody made them agree to that in the first place. So, most people do, honor their agreements, their confidential settlements. They don't, whatever reason, they don't decide to take that risk.
Yeah.
But it seems that reporters are bragging about getting people to violate confidential settlements, which they signed, as though getting someone to violate a confidential settlement is like a really good thing. Yeah. I wouldn't do it. I whether it's my client or not, I wouldn't, go and if I knew somebody had one, argue that go ahead and just violate it. It's got a lot of consequences in addition to, it may seem like a good thing because, of course, it does seem like a good thing to reporters because then they have a story.
Sure.
But is that really the right thing to do?
No.
It's really, everybody's got their own moral code. And but I just, and there are politicians that have jumped on the bandwagon too and want to restrict a woman's choice to have a confidential settlement at certain points, because politicians, they put their finger in the wind and they see which way it's blowing and say, "Was this popular to do? Oh, it sounds good."
Yeah.
That's because the public doesn't understand until they become a victim. And then I have to tell them, well, politicians just restricted your right to, in certain cases, to have a confidential settlement, so it's less likely that the predator is going to pay, because it sounded like a politically good thing that'll help them get reelected.
Yeah.
But actually it hurts you. So then they say, oh, well, we didn't really understand what that was. Okay, so this is, I don't blame the public, but, unfortunately, this is the situation. So I'm going to stand up for what's right. I'm going to stand up for victims' rights, as I have for 43 years, and for choices for victims. And I'm not going to have those choices taken away. It's like the right to choose abortion. People who don't agree with that want to take that choice away from women. I'm not in favor of taking choices away from women. Okay, I'm not Big Brother or Big Sister or Big Mama or any of that. I think an adult woman should be able to have a right to choose. That's pretty revolutionary still in 2019, that a woman should be able to actually choose. You think about the fact that we're sitting here talking about taking choices away from victims. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
Shocking, isn't it?
Yes. Well, and it seems like the worst thing they kind of were able to come up with was that you didn't endorse, you endorsed the confidentiality agreement.
Well, no, you mean a bill?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. That you were in favor of her signing.
Okay, I never talk about whether I have represented any individual in entering into a confidential settlement. So I'm not going to affirm or deny or anything.
No, I don't want you to. I was just saying
I think you're talking about a bill.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, I think you're talking about, there was an indication that I may have said I would oppose a certain bill in the legislature that would have restricted confidential settlement agreements in some ways.
Yes.
And yes, I would oppose a bill that takes away choices from victims.
Right. Cases that you're involved in are on your website as they come up. So if people are really interested, is it Gloria Allred?
GloriaAllred.com.
Okay.
But the point is, all my cases that I'm doing are not on my webpage. I'd say 99% of them are being handled quietly and confidentially.
Yes.
But the ones we handle publicly,
yes,
because the client has indicated they think that's the important way to help achieve their goal.
Right.
And if I've agreed, then we're handling them publicly. Those would be on my webpage.
Yes. Yeah. So you're going to be traveling, like you're going to be in New York, you're going to be in Chicago.
I'm traveling quite a bit.
Yeah.
In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to Georgia this week to give a speech, and then I'm coming back. Then I'm being honored here on Saturday, and then on Monday I'll be on a plane to Boston, and then from there to New York on some cases, and then back. And so I'm on the road a lot. But thank you so much for having me in the studio today.
Oh, of course. And just one last thing. You are on social media. Is it at Gloria Allred?
Yes.
On Twitter and Instagram?
Yes. Yeah. Well,
okay.
I mean, I'm not there the way I should be. I don't do much on it, but sometimes yes. And on Facebook as well.
Great. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. This has been such an honor,
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.